Now the next fly that I'm going to tie up in my Carrie Stevens series that I've been doing is called the Golden Witch. I chose this pattern for a couple of different reasons. One, I like the Grizzly pattern in a bait fish. I like contrasting colors. Also in our kind of greenish waters around here, greenish brownish waters, the gold and the orange show up very, very well. So I think this is a wonderful little shad bait fish imitation for around here, as well as the pattern itself is a nice example of how you can just change up a few materials, tying almost the exact same fly as some of the other Carrie Stevens patterns. In particular, the Black Max that I did last week, very, very similar. You change up 4 different materials in this fly, and you've got a different pattern. So, and I will talk about that as we progress through to actually tying this up. So that's the Golden Witch, and we'll go ahead and get started tying. We'll start the Golden Witch by placing our hook in the vise. This is a Mustad R79. It's a 9X long streamer hook. I'm going to debarb this. This is in a size 4. I can tie this fly in anything from, say, a size 1, which would be a real long hook, on down to maybe a 6 or an 8. It just depends on the length of the bait fish pattern that you want. If your waters have most of the bait fish, or at a certain time of year, are shorter, about 1.5 inches, go to a smaller hook. If they get longer, remember these were tied mostly to mimic smelt patterns in the Northeast, and which are real long. So these ended up being 3 and 4 inch long bait fish patterns. But the body on the Golden Witch has an orange floss, so we're going to start by attaching a white thread. This is a flat wax nylon. We're going to attach this a couple of eye lengths behind the eye of the hook. And I'm going to wrap this on down the hook shank in touching turns to get a nice base layer. I'm using a flat wax nylon so that it's a little bit bigger, and I'll move from one end of the hook shank to the other just a little bit quicker. I'm going to stop maybe 2/3 the way down the hook shank to tie in my tag. My tag is made up of a flat silver Mylar tinsel. This is silver or gold on one side, silver on the other. This is a Danville size 14. We're going to use this for the tag as well as the rib. I'm going to tie this in on the far side of the hook shank with the gold side out. That way when I start to wrap it on, it'll flip over to the silver side. I can pull the butt end of that down towards where I wrap that in to minimize the butt end, and then put about 4 or 5 wraps to secure that along the hook shank. Now I've seen Carrie Stevens patterns tied where the entire tag is actually right in front of the point of the hook, and the body itself is much shorter. Most of them that I've seen have the tag basically from the end of the hook shank to just in front of the point of the hook, which is what I prefer. So you put a few wraps in so that you're about 2/3 down the hook shank, and then we'll turn the fly over and start wrapping in our tag. I usually get 7 to maybe 8 wraps. Some people say that traditionally there's going to be 8 wraps. I want to try and get these as touching turns and touching as much as possible. I don't want those to spread out. There's 6, 7, this one I've got 8 wraps, and then I'll start wrapping back up. This is just going to give me a nice, 1/4 inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch long silver tag on the back. I'm going to put in just a couple, 3 wraps here to secure that. We want to make certain that we're not bulking up the back end. I'm going to use the same tinsel for the rib on this. Again, tying this with the gold side out on the far side of the hook. I'll secure that, shortening up the tag there, and put one wrap backwards to secure that in. This does not have a tail on it, so we can go right to the body. The body is a orange floss. I'm going to use a Danville 4-strand rayon orange floss. I'm going to use all 4 strands. I want to get about 12 to 13 inches out here because this is a long shanked hook. You definitely don't want to be in a position where when you get to the end here you don't have enough, or you know, you're fighting with just a real small little thing here, because odds are you're going to lose it and then it'll all unravel on you. You got to start this over again. I'm going to attach this along the hook shank on my side of the hook shank right here, and then pull down the ends here so that they're just to the end of the head space. Now I can start wrapping these in, and I'm wrapping forward to secure these along the hook shank. I'm going to flatten my thread out. That way I'm going to minimize the round thread wraps along the hook shank and just try and make this as nice and smooth as possible. If we put the effort into making a nice smooth body here, then when we actually apply the floss, that's where it pays off. So just stop every now and again, flatten your thread a little bit more, make certain that the floss isn't rotating, spiraling around the hook shank on you, which it tends to do. Just take your time with it. End up right here, just the back of our head space, ready to apply the floss. When I go to apply the floss on the body here, I'm stroking these fibers out so that they are all under the same tension as I start to wrap this up the hook shank. This helps them to keep from separating along the hook shank as I'm wrapping them in. Now you'll notice my first wrap is angled backwards just a little bit. That's because I need to cover up all of these thread wraps that are just right here at the end of my tag. And I have found that generally if I try to wrap everything down right to the end of the tag so my first wrap goes forward, I end up with too many thread wraps around here and it bulks up the back end. If I do it this way, then it ends up not being quite so bulky back here. I get all those thread wraps covered up, and now all of my floss as I apply it is just going to overlap the previous wrap about halfway, and this will help provide a really nice smooth flat body. Secure this up in the head space with a couple wraps. Trim away the excess. Now I'm ready to apply my rib. When I start to apply the rib, here, what's important is that all of the wraps are nice and evenly spaced. You want to get 11 to 12 wraps, something like that. I sometimes get 10, but More importantly, you just want to make certain that they're all evenly spaced. So at this stage, the initial part of the body is done, and I am ready to change over to my Danville 6/0 black, which is what will finish out the fly and create the head. I'll take this back more or less the length of the head of what I want, smoothing this off here a little bit. As I tie in materials, I might actually even go back a little bit further, but this will smooth off the head area right here, so it is smooth on the top and the bottom for me to put in my belly as well as my throat, and then underwing and wing, which are the next step for the Golden Witch. The Golden Witch has a belly on it that is made out of white bucktail, and you're basically going to cut out a section of bucktail, fairly sparse, and put it in the hair stacker. I've already done that and prepped this. You don't want it too thick and too bulky, it's just fairly sparse. And the tips don't have to necessarily be nice and sharp and flat on the end. If they're a little bit tapered, I think it's much better. I tie these in so that they are just a little bit past the bend. We'll secure those with a pinch wrap and wrap those in. Make certain that all of these are right on the very bottom. Sometimes, because you're on the bottom and you're wrapping around this way, as you pull up this way, it tends to want to make those bucktails come up this side of the hook shank. So I want to make certain, I use my thumbnail to push those down and make certain that they are nice and centered right on the very bottom of the hook shank. With those in place, I can cut off the excess. You generally want to put in 5 or 6 wraps to secure your materials like this, because when you're cutting off that excess like that, it can push and pull things around. If you only put in 2 or 3 wraps to secure those, you'll definitely move those around. Smooth that off a little bit, and now I'm ready for my throat. Throat on this is a Grizzly Hackle, and I'm using, this is actually a whiting rooster. It's called a 4B. And it's a Grizzly. If you can find a Grizzly Schlappen or something like that, that works well. It's just a nice soft hackle with the Grizzly pattern, the black and white. And I'm going to go ahead and strip off some fibers from both sides of this feather to make my throat. When I tie that throat in, I want it to be about halfway down the hook shank. I'll secure that right up under the underside and bring that up with a pinching loop. Wrap 4 or 5 wraps to secure that in. And again, wanting to make certain that I didn't roll that towards me, I'm going to take a look at the bottom here and make certain that all of those are secured right on the very bottom of the hook shank, and they are. If you've been watching the various Carrie Stevens flies that I've been doing the last few weeks, you're probably starting to notice a trend in a lot of these in terms of materials that are used, or at least components that make up these and how they're tied in. In other words, like the Wizard I did last week, it has a belly and it has a throat. The throat's white Hackles and not Grizzly. They're still tied in the exact same way. So you're essentially making the same fly. This fly right here, if I were making the Grizzly, would be tied exactly the same with the exception of its red floss and white Hackle, but everything else is exactly the same. So as you're looking at these various patterns that Carrie Stevens did and how they're tied, look for those things that are similar in regards to how the components are put in, because if you get them down for one fly, then you've got them down for another one when you just have to change the color. So I'm going to smooth the head area off here so that I can now put in the underwing and my actual wing. Underwing is comprised of Peacock Herl. Not all of her flies have underwings, but this one does. Like the Wizard last week, which had an underwing of Peacock Herl. You want to pick out about 6, maybe 7 strands, 5 if you like it a little sparser, and you're going to want to even those tips up. They don't have to be exactly perfectly even, but I do like to get them fairly even and together. So just take a moment to even those up a little bit, and then you'll bunch those together, and we'll put those on top here. You're going to want those to extend, maybe about 2 to 3 eye lengths behind the bend of the hook. A quarter, maybe 3/8 of an inch if you want to do some measuring, something like that. And then with another pinch loop, we'll secure that down on top of the hook shank. Again, putting in 5 or 6 turns of thread to secure that, because when I double check it here and I cut the excess off, I don't want to inadvertently pull that in one way and then everything's out of shape, out of alignment. We'll cut the excess off. We'll wrap those down, and again, just wrapping in a little bit to tidy that up and have a nice platform for our wing. A lot of the Carrie Stevens flies end up with a longer head to them, and the primary reason for that is that many of them she actually incorporates different bands of colored thread on them. So the not the Wizard, but Don's Delight that I did a couple weeks ago, as well as the Allie's Favorite, have a red band of thread right in the middle. So plus you are tying in a number of materials for the wings, but it's okay if your head ends up being, say, 2.5 eye lengths long, if you're putting that band in there. But you do want to take a little bit of care not to get too many thread wraps in there. You can bulk up those heads pretty quick. Now the wing on this is comprised of 2 Grizzly Hackles. I should say 4. You've got a right and a left, so there's 2 Grizzly Hackles right here, and that's the wing. There's what's called a shoulder, and that is made from ring-necked pheasant tippet, and then you have a cheek of jungle cock. I've already assembled these and have these already set up, so all I have to do is put these together, making certain that the tips are even back here. You can easily wet your fingers a little bit, slide those around a little if those tips aren't even, to get them in place. I'll cut the excess stems off here that I used as handles while I was prefabbing those, and then my wing is ready to be tied in. I like to take these and actually separate them and then slide the wing on both sides of the hook shank, bringing those butt ends up together right on top. This puts my wing a little bit more horizontal. If I just place it right down to the hook shank and tie it in, it tends to kick the wings up into the air a little bit more than I care for. With those in place, I'll go ahead and put 5 or 6 turns on here to secure it, And we'll take a look at our wing. And that's turned out pretty good. I want to make certain that it's fairly lateral. I want to make certain that I don't have a twist in it on the hook shank. In other words, this portion right here that is flat, I don't want it actually coming out at an angle. I want it to be nice and vertical off the top. You do get sometimes, you'll notice that this wing has a little bit of a curve down here. If you watch the video for the Don's Delight, I ended up with that in there as well. And that happens sometimes. There's different things you can do to alleviate that. I generally don't worry about it. These are fishing flies, and as soon as this hits the water, it's all going to start collapsing anyway, and let alone after a few fish. So, but that wing looks pretty good, and so then I will finish lashing down the butt ends and then start shaping the head. Once you have those lashed down, you want to go up to the eye of the hook to shape the head, and then come all the way back, doing the final shaping, making certain the back few wraps are making certain that we're covering up any thread wraps from where the throat was tied in. I don't want any thread wraps from that throat sticking out from underneath the wing. I also want to make certain that I don't have any white material sticking out through there. So that's the purpose of the head, is to cover it all up, make it nice and tidy. Then I'll go ahead and flatten my thread to get my whip finish in. I'm going to put in about a 9 or 10 turn whip finish by flattening the thread out. As I do this, it is going to help to fill in the gaps from all these bumps of thread, and it actually really does help smooth the head off here. So the head cement that I put on here will have a little bit less of a job in terms of smoothing things off and making this nice and neat and clean. Cut away my excess thread, and I'm ready to start the process of finishing the head of the fly. Boy, that turned out nice. If your hackle, like on this side, kind of got moved up and over, you can run your bodkin down the middle of that wing there, kind of split those up, pull that back down a little bit, and bring the other one back down. Again, it looks great for the camera right here, but in the water, this thing will start to basically take on a life of its own, which is kind of what you want your flies to do anyway. And I am just tidying this up, as I said, for the camera. Okay. So I'll take my Fly Tight, and that's my initial coat. It is a thin down head cement, an alcohol-based head cement that I like because it just soaks right into those threads, and it will seal up that head real well. And then we'll start the process of putting some hard as hull on there to finish this off. But that's the Golden Witch. In a moment, we'll go ahead and get some hard as hull on this. So our Fly Tight is all set up in the head of the fly. Now I'm going to put my next coat of finish on here. Because this is just all black in the head, there's no red stripe, I'll end up putting a black lacquer coating on the very top of this just to make it nice and glossy. But I'm going to go ahead and use some hard as hull in between because I need to fill in the gaps of the thread wraps on the head there to smooth it off. Otherwise, I'm putting 3 or 4 coats of black lacquer on there. And this will also make the fly a little bit stronger. The hard as hull will penetrate down into those thread wraps. If you watched any of the videos I've done before, I talk about the process of finishing the heads on these flies. And this hardest hull, even though it looks like it's nice and smooth right now, and I've got a nice smooth black glossy head, it will dry and shrink down to those thread wraps. So that's the nice thing I like about putting it on at this stage, because it really does get down into the threads, into the cracks of the threads in the head of the fly, and it will make a nice base and fill in the gaps of those thread wraps and everything, so that when I put 2 coats of this on, it's fairly smooth, and when I put a top coat of black lacquer on there, it will level itself out, and it doesn't take much lacquer to just smooth the whole thing off. And you don't have to do this step if you're just going to be fishing the fly. You don't say you don't have the hardest hull, or you don't have a black lacquer or something like that. But generally these flies are finished this way. They look a lot better. I don't think that it necessarily, other than securing the head a little bit, makes it fish any better, but they certainly do look nice. So that's the Golden Witch, another classic Carrie Stevens pattern. As I mentioned before, it's very much like the Black Max, with the exception of it's a orange floss body, it's a Grizzly hackle throat, and the wing is comprised of Grizzly hackles with a shoulder, as opposed to the Black Max just has black and yellow hackles on the outside with just the cheek of jungle cock. So again, if you're watching any of these videos, you should start to pick up that a lot of these patterns are very similar. It's just a little bit different colored material tied in to make a different pattern. So you start getting some of the basic skills down, like in the Don's Delight, it used the gold or the ring-necked pheasant tippets, and then it's easy to transfer that technique and everything and material over to another pattern. So that's the Golden Witch. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and not only learned a new pattern, but maybe learned some new techniques and a few new skills. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button below. You can support Dressed Irons by hitting the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos are published. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Until next time, remember, it's fly time. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.